It's time to get rock hard. Today we are looking at the Jade Obelisk. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you all doing today? When the Jade Obelisk first released, I was pretty darn hot on them, but as time went on, my opinion soured, and recently I plonked them right at the bottom of my tier list. For whatever reason, this inspired me to pick them back up and give them a whirl, and my opinion may have changed once more. But before we get into all of that, it's time for a little bit of shilling.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, or using my Element Games affiliate link down below when buying some new Warcry gubbins. A huge shout out to my patrons and members who you can find on screen now. Badoosh. But with all of that out of the way, it's time to get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
And we are back, and as per usual, we are going to start with their battle trait. It is called the Blessings of the Speaker, and it was added during the Briar and Bone set. It reads, the first time this battle that a friendly fighter with this battle trait uses the Bloody Tribute ability, Badoosh, you can remove each damage point allocated to one friendly fighter with the Icon Bearer rune mark. This is terrible. This is one of the worst traits in Warcry because it doesn't actually do anything of note. And when it does pop off on the rare occasions it ever will, it still might not have any effect because it's a once per battle thing. Bloody Tribute is really hard to pull off, and healing your speaker, he could be dead, you might not even have a speaker in your warband, or he could just be uninjured, completely wasting this trait. It doesn't play into the Jade Obelisk playstyle, it doesn't help them in any meaningful way, and it buffs an ability that nobody's playing around because even when buffed, Bloody Tribute is not good. As sad as their battle trait may be, the same cannot be said for their reaction, the Curse of Jade. A fighter can make this reaction when they are targeted by a melee attack action but before the hit rolls are made. Subtract 1 from the damage points allocated to this fighter by each hit and critical hit from that attack action to a minimum of 1. This at a glance is a fairly common reaction in Warcry, but the Curse of Jade is, I believe, unique because it actually affects critical hits and hits, not just hits. Remember, hits and crits in Warcry are different things. And simply put, the Curse of Jade is really solid. Being able to reduce damage by 1 and crit damage by 1 makes your guys very hard to shift, especially when fighting into other mid-range or elite warbands who are filled with 2-4 or 2-5 profiles. In those situations, being able to half the damage you receive is not insignificant, and your guys will stick around for a long time with this reaction active. Now, of course, you are burning a very valuable action to do this, but if you're on an objective and you need to keep it held, then the Curse of Jade is absolutely ideal. Just stay still, stone up, get rock hard, and just tank it. You will do fine. And there's not much else to say about it. The Curse of Jade is just a bit of a highlight to the defensive nature of the Jade Obelisk. Going on to the Jade Obelisk's universal abilities, these are abilities that everybody in the warband can use, and the Jade Obelisk only have one. It's a double called Stone Warp, and it is pretty darn wordy. A fighter can only use this ability if they are within 9 inches of a visible friendly fighter with the Jade Obelisk and the Icon Bearer rune marks. Remove a number of damage points allocated to this fighter equal to half the value of this ability, rounding up. If this fighter is also within 6 inches of a friendly fighter with the Jade Obelisk and Priest rune mark, remove a number of damage points allocated to this fighter equal to the value of this ability instead. This is your basic heal with a lot of extra steps. Your entire warband can heal, but you have to fill the requirements, and the heal's not that great unless you fill all of the requirements. So if Daddy Desolator wants to heal up, he not only has to be next to Speaker Senpai, but also Priest Papa. Stone Warp, despite being surprisingly complex to pass on first or even second glance, is actually incredibly powerful and one of the strengths of the Jade Obelisk. Throw in some fairly average defensive stats for a mid-range warband, and the Curse of Jade and Stone Warp, and your guys become incredibly hard to shift. being able to heal up to 6 wounds on a dime, with the activation caveat being fairly lax. Remember, these ranges are not short, 9 inches and 6 inches respectively, to get this ability to work at full power, and the models they require are either required to run Jade Obelisk as a whole, or really good independently. Stone Rope is such a powerful defensive ability that really helps round out that aspect of the Jade Obelisk. But that's the end of their basic abilities. It's time to look through their units, starting with their hero, the Nephrite Priestess, and I would consider this last to be the biggest downside to the Jade Obelisk, because she is not good. Badoosh. This last is 105 points, which isn't that expensive for a bespoke leader, but she's movement 4, toughness 3 and 20 wounds with a 4-3-1-4 profile. She is decently durable for her price. 20 wounds for just over 100 points is kind of okay. You would normally be looking at around about like 12-15 wounds for 100 points, so 20 is not bad, even if toughness 3 is a bit naff. Offensively though, she misses the mark completely. 4-3-1-4 is just not a good profile. You'll do next to no damage unless you crit, and frankly that low strength and high attack number just means you're going to be countered potentially to death if you keep on using her to attack, and all of that is compounded by the fact that the Nephrite Priestess is required for several abilities in Jade Obelisk to work effectively or at all, and her own ability, Bloody Tribute, which I've already had on screen but I will do again, Badoosh, is not good. It's a triple. A fighter can only use this ability if an enemy fighter has been taken down by them this activation. That's a pretty big requirement already. Pick a friendly fighter within 9 inches of a visible friendly fighter with the Jade Obelisk and Icon Bearer rune marks. That fighter makes a bonus move action. A bonus move action is very nice. The issue is this is one move action with an incredibly high cost to do. It's a triple, which is not great, and you have to kill something with your 4-3-1-4 profile. Unless they were already about to die anyway and you go out of your way to do this to get that move action, it's just a little bit pants. It does have one big benefit, and that's that it is basically a board-wide ability. You just have to be within 9 inches of an Icon Bearer, and then one of those fighters can make a move action. The Jade Obelisk are not necessarily known for their mobility, but neither are any Movement 3 factions, and nearly every other Movement 3 faction has a substantially better ability than this. This is really underwhelming, and like I said before, even with the battle trait buff, it's not good. But like with any ability, Bloody Tribute does have some use, and that bonus move action could be game winning at the right time, but you have to look out for it and really dedicate to that play, and there could be better, more reliable plays that you're missing because you're trying to force Bloody Tribute, so always bear that in mind. Going on to the Obelisk Bearer, or as I called him before, the Speaker. This is the guy with the big old stone monolith strapped to his back, and he's a burly boy. For 110 points, you get a movement 3, toughness 4, and 20 wound laddie with a 4-4-2-4 profile. And this guy is really solid. 4-4-2-4 is an absolutely fine profile at this points level, and again, 20 wounds is fantastic for 110 points, and toughness 4. Dude's an absolute machine. The movement 3 isn't great, but then again, one of the biggest draws of the Obelisk Bearer is that you will almost always take at least one because they're cheap and because of that Icon Bearer rune mark. We've already seen 2 abilities and the battle trait require the Obelisk Bearer to do anything, and here we are. This is the guy. He is well worth taking. And finally, this guy also is the key to your quad, the Might of the Speaker. Pick a visible friendly fighter within a number of inches of this fighter equal to the value of this ability. Add 3 to the value of this ability if a friendly fighter of the Jade Obelisk and the Priest rune marks is also on the battlefield. That fighter can make up to 2 bonus move, bonus attack, or bonus disengage actions in any combination. This quad is a great toolbox with a surprisingly long range, up to 9 inches, providing your Priestess is still alive. Means you can reach out and touch pretty much anyone anywhere and get them to attack twice, move twice, or any combination of above and even more than that. It's kind of wild, and when we start looking at the more damaging profiles in Jade Obelisk, being able to amplify your damage or simply just move across the board more effectively is something you will absolutely value, and frankly, if you have an Obelisk Bearer on the board, you will likely use the Might of the Speaker over Rampage in many cases, because you can use your Obelisk Bearer to do one thing and then make a mate do something completely different elsewhere. In a roundabout way, think of this as inspiring presence but without having to activate the model you're choosing, and also being able to choose things I've already activated. You can pull off some pretty sick combos with the might of the speaker. I'm a huge fan of the squad and, by extension, the Obelisk Bearer as a whole, because he is just so darn good. Taking a bit of a step back, we have the Idolarc Badoosh. This guy's a 3-3-1-3 for 105 points, with movement 8, toughness 3 and 8 wounds with the Beast rune mark and the Fly rune mark. The Idolarc is fairly expensive for his stats, he's very squishy, but with movement 8 and Fly, this guy's quite interesting because he can get around the board, he can contest objectives. Sadly, this guy is a beast, so he can't take treasures, but in objective games, he's kind of fine. His biggest draw, though, and why you would take this laddie, is because of his ability, the Gaze of the Idolarc, which is another triple. Pick an enemy fighter within 9 inches of this fighter, subtract half the value of this ability rounding up from either the move characteristic or the toughness characteristic of that fighter to a minimum of 1 until the end of the battle round. I really like the Gaze of the Idolarc. It's a little bit expensive, to be fair. You can get very similar abilities to this on doubles, but being able to completely shaft something's toughness so your guys can hit more reliably, or being able to completely gimp someone's movement is also pretty darn good, and the fact that it can't miss, and it's got a very long range of 9 inches on a model that can move 16 inches per turn with Fly, it's pretty good. Think of this as a net adjacent ability, but with a 25-inch range. When all is said and done, I am always a little bit torn on the Idolarc because it's kind of solid. That ability is pretty good. I'm always a big fan of fast-moving flyers on the relatively cheap side, and this thing is fairly cheap. But for 105 points, you can take a Desecrator or a Defacer, which we'll get into in a second, and it's tough giving up something that is so good at killing things. Some other plus sides on the Idolarc is that it can heal and it does have access to your reaction, so it is surprisingly hard to shift in the right situations once it is on an objective, but it's one of those models that you're likely to cut, and I am not entirely sure if that's actually the right thing to do. It depends on the makeup of the rest of your list. The Idolarc is your only real offensive support piece, and if you aren't bringing something else that's fast or something else that can fill in this sort of like pseudo-net debuffing role, then the Jade Obelisk can often feel like they can't reach out and impact the game in any way that isn't combat related. And the Idolarc really does fill that hole that many Jade Obelisk lists simply have because they drop the Idolarc at the first sign of a Defacer or a Desecrator. My biggest takeaway with the Idolarc is that I think people need to take him more before just writing him off without ever playing him. I think this thing does have a lot of interesting play and use scenarios, and for 5 points more than the Desecrator, he's not that hard to squeeze in. And considering you will not be short on Desecrators anyway, the Idolarc isn't a bad choice. So give it a go and let me know in the comments down below how that worked out for you. Next up we have Desecrators, and Desecrators are some of my favourite models in the game because they look pretty darn cool, but also because they're pretty darn good. We have 2 variants, Badoosh Badoosh, the Desecrator with a Statue Smasher Hammer and the Desecrator with Iconoclast Warpick, and both are great. They are both 100 points, they are movement 3, toughness 4 and 12 wounds. The Hammer is a 3-5-3-5 and the Warpick is a 4-5-2-5. And you can't go wrong with either. I believe conventional wisdom says to go with the Iconoclast Warpick because you're getting the extra attack, and the extra attack will likely do more than the extra point of damage. However, I am a sucker for 3-5 damage profiles, and I like the Hammer more, even though I know in my heart of heart, I am likely better off with the Warpick. I like the Hammer. I can't help myself. The Hammer's pretty darn cool. They're both great. If I was to build competitively, then I would likely go with the Iconoclast Warpick, and you probably should too. But don't be shamed into not taking that Statue Smasher Hammer, because that Hammer is pretty darn nice. And what really makes the Desecrator shine, beyond all of this is already fantastic, right? For 100 points, this is a good profile. These are good damage profiles. These are great defensive stats. 100 points, absolutely solid. What makes them truly shine is their ability. It is a double called Rock Shattering Blow. Add 1 to the strength characteristic of the next melee attack action made by this fighter, this activation, and 1 to the damage points allocated by each hit and each critical hit from that action. So now your weapons suddenly go from a 3-5-3-5 or a 4-5-2-5 into a 3-6-4-6 or a 4-6-3-6, and that is something to behold. These guys get in and they are going to be taking chunks out of literally anything they touch. These guys do incredible amounts of damage, and I ain't going to lie, I am enamored with the Smash Hammers going to a 4-6 profile, right? And going to strength 6 is such a ludicrously high strength to have on a model at 100 points. Strength 6, 4-6, or 3-6 damage with 3 or 4 attacks based on weapon is absolutely bonkers. These guys can outswing nearly anything in the game. The only things that can reasonably outscrap a Desecrator for their point, a point for point, would be Flame Seekers. I'm pretty sure the Flame Seekers do actually win out on the efficiency scale, but not by much. These guys are absolutely bonkers. They can upswing like crazy. They can delete chaff like no one's business, and they are prime targets for blessings, because 12 wounds, as solid as that is for 100 points, for 15 points more, taking these guys to 16 wounds, you have something that is truly beautiful. For 115 points with this offensive profile and 16 wounds toughness 4 and their reaction and Stone Warp, these guys don't go anywhere, and they scrap and they brawl and they smash for days. The only thing holding them back is their movement, and there are so few ways to increase that movement in Jade Obelisk and even in Chaos as a whole. The only model that springs to mind immediately is the Sloppity Bile Piper, so there aren't many ways to get this thing moving, but once these guys get into position, they absolutely shred both variants. I absolutely love these guys. They are so much fun to throw into people's faces and just completely annihilate with. And again, I wholeheartedly recommend trying these guys out with +4 wounds. 16 wound Desecrators are hilariously fun, and they dodge so many things that would kill a 12 wound Desecrator. Namely, massive threats like Vexmore and Annihilator Primes are far less likely to kill you, meaning you can swing back and do massive chunks of damage and gain incredible amounts of value from your relatively cheap mid-range. I have waxed lyrical about the Desecrators, but there are also Defacers in the Jade Obelisk, and these guys are in an unfortunate position because they are 95 points, they are movement 4, which is quite nice, they are toughness 4, which is quite nice, they've only got 10 wounds, which is a little bit on the low end, but they are a 4-4-2-3 in melee, and that's not a bad profile. That's a pretty darn good profile. I can't shake the feeling that for 5 points more, I can take a Desecrator with Iconoclast Warpick, gain 2 wounds, gain a strength, and gain 2 crit. And yeah, I lose 1 movement, right? But it's hard to give up all those offensive and defensive stats for the Stonecutter tools. But there is one big advantage, and that's their unique ability. And that ability is called Hammering Strikes, and it's a double. A fighter can only use this ability if an enemy fighter has been allocated damage points by an attack action made by them this activation. Add half the value of this ability rounding up to the damage points by each crit and each critical hit from the next melee attack action this activation that targets that enemy fighter. This ability is insane. Like, this ability can spike to ungodly levels. If you have a high double, you're going to a 5-6 damage profile with 4 attacks. Incredible. Absolutely insane. You are only strength 4, but when every single hit is hitting for 5 damage minimum, it's incredible. If you start spiking or just swinging into a chaff or other mid-range with toughness 4, you're going to start deleting the sun. But the activation clause is a huge disadvantage to Hammering Strikes, because you have to be in combat already. You can't move and then use Hammering Strikes. You have to attack first and then Hammering Strikes and then attack again. And that is a massive restriction. It makes this incredibly clunky to use, and technically, whilst Rock Shattering Blow for the Desecrators increases your damage by less, you can use this after a move. You can't use Hammering Strikes after a move. You are locked into staying stationary and just swinging away. And in those scenarios where you can do that, it's really good. But also, your guy only has 10 wounds. So there's a pretty high chance you ain't going to survive once you get into combat, right? So I always find the Defacers to be a real hard sell. They're obviously not bad. 4-4-2-3 is a really nice profile. And they are still Jade Obelisk. They can still heal. They've still got that wonderful reaction, right? But Desecrators are right there for such a small amount of points more that I always find it incredibly difficult to squeeze in Defacers when I know I can just take a Desecrator. Sadly, there is one last profile, and as much as I find the Defacer with Stonecutter tools hard to use and fit in, the Defacer with Antithet Bow, Badoosh, this thing is dreadful. For 95 points, you have the same defensive line as the Defacer with Stonecutter tools, with a 3-3-1-3 profile in melee and a 2-3-1-3 profile at a 3 to 15 inch range. That's bad. And the reason that's bad is because you can get this exact profile, like every stat identical, right? On a model that is 20 points cheaper in other warbands. This thing is disgustingly overpriced and you should never ever take it. If it was 75 points, the Defacer with Bow actually becomes fairly interesting because you have a way of reaching out and touching things, you have a way of doing a bit of poke and chip damage, dealing with like vulnerable backlines, squishy things, and there's value in that. And of course, if there was 75 points, that's a substantial reduction in points compared to the Desecrators, giving you a viable chaff option you don't currently have. And the final nail in the coffin is that these guys don't have access to any of the cool abilities everyone else does, bar Stone Warp and bar their reaction. It's a little bit on the naff side, a little bit on the cheeky side for something that is 95 points. That's the warband out of the way. Let's quickly touch on some allies, and some key allies I really enjoy taking are the Mind Stealer Spheranx, who might seem fairly obvious if you've been paying attention, because the Mind Stealer Spheranx is very fast, it's good in combat, it's very fast, it's got a net, it's very fast, and to top it all off, it's not all that expensive. You can find a full video on the Mind Stealer Spheranx right here. Badoosh, check it out, it's pretty darn good. Other wonderful options would be things like Vexmore. Badoosh, Vexmore is interesting because Vexmore shares a lot of the things the Jade Obelisk currently do, which is slow movement and incredible damage with a fair amount of heft and bulk behind it. What makes Vexmore interesting in Jade Obelisk is that Vexmore is actually the fastest thing in Jade Obelisk, if you were to take him, because he has access to movement abilities that the Desecrators do not have. So he's actually surprisingly quick on his feet compared to the rest of your warband, which is hilarious. Other solid picks would be the Trueblood, Badoosh, because the Trueblood has a perfect net, is pretty darn good in combat, isn't too slow, and is a reasonable price, giving your Jade Obelisk the ability to shut down enemy titans and other troublesome foes. My final suggestion would be Chaos Spawn and Chaos Furies as thralls, because Chaos Spawn for 170 points are kind of wonderful. 30 wounds, toughness 4 is a lot to cut through, and they're pretty darn decent in combat with 4 attack, strength 4 and 2-4 damage. Spawn are pretty darn good. Chaos Furies are also pretty darn good because these guys have movement 8 and fly. They don't have the beast rune mark, and they are 95 points, allowing you to fly across the board and pick up treasures, or just land on objectives in a similar way to the Idolarc, only for cheaper. Pretty sure I've already said finally, but I'll say it one more time. Finally, the Slaughter Priest or the Great Bray Shaman are two fantastic picks. The Slaughter Priest gives you nice amounts of bulk and a pull, and the Great Bray Shaman is faster, also has a pull, and has a range attack, but is a lot worse in melee combat. Any combination of these allies or thralls put into Jade Obelisk should help iron out any flaws the base warband has. And before I move on to the outro, here is an example list for the Jade Obelisk. Badoosh. And that's the Jade Obelisk. After playing them some more recently and doing this video, I have gained a newfound appreciation for the stony lads and ladies, but I do think they need a little bit of help. Their biggest drawback is the fact that they are almost reliant on allies to function because they are so static in faction. They just need allies to fill in those gaps, and those allies can get pretty darn expensive. Overall, I do think my opinion has changed for the better for Jade Obelisk, and I don't think they're as bad as I made out my bespoke list last week. However, the points I made do still stand. I largely think the Flameseekers do what these guys do, but they do it better because they have access to mobility, their damage output's actually higher, and their models are actually cheaper. So it's one of those things where the Jade Obelisk are pretty cool, but the Flameseekers are still just over there, which makes them a little bit harder to recommend. But that being said, if the Jade Obelisk were to get some tweaks in an FAQ in the future, These guys are on the cusp of being something really special. Those Defacers with bows getting a point reduction, the Stonecutter tools getting a slight point reduction, maybe changing up the ability on that Nephrite Priestess to have a more reliable movement ability would be quite nice as well. But as it stands, the Jade Obelisk are undeniably solid. They are as solid as the rocks they carry on their back. They are pretty darn cool. And if you have them in your pile of shame, whip them out, build them up, paint them up. These guys have beautiful models and they are pretty darn fun on the battlefield. But that's the end of this video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe and let me know in the comments down below what you think of the Jade Obelisk. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Boy howdy, it's Toast and it's time for the post-Toast credits. A huge shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Keep Plang, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Filax, Sable Saber, Mrs. Toast, Steve Bean, The Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. As always, thank you so much for supporting the channel. I'll see you all next time.